Greetings, everyone. Pete Pardo here from Sea of Tranquility. Welcome to another episode of Friday Morning at the Funhouse, alongside my good friend Martin Popoff, Canada, New York, representing in the house today. Good morning, Martin.
Yeah, it's morning, sir.
Martin.
Morning, sir. Looking forward to this one. Wow, this is going to be a strange one, but
Yes.
yeah. One weather update to give you though. I mean, the big news is that there's the big storm coming to Canada, but it's coming to Nova Scotia and Halifax and all that. But yeah,
Also,
I
it's
don't think we're
missing you.
getting
Okay.
any from it.
Yeah.
Yeah,
We had about a full day of rain. Well, not a full day, a good half day of rain yesterday. Blue skies today. I'm supposed to do a walkathon for charity on Sunday, but I hear now it might rain. I'm like, so we'll see how that goes. But I'm hoping we have good weather a week from tomorrow, because not that it really matters, because we're going to be indoors all day. But I know for people who want to go out and about during Sea of Tranquility Fall Fest during the breaks and things like that, hopefully the weather is pretty good. But
we did the family walkathon, runathon thing last weekend, which is the Terry Fox run. I don't know if you know the whole Terry Fox story, but he was a guy who lost his leg and walked and jogged actually with a prosthetic leg all the way across Canada in the early 80s, 1981. He's a huge Canadian hero. He actually made the whole thing, and then he died of cancer right after. He had cancer. He raised all this money for cancer. So they have this Terry Fox run every single year across Canada. So we
cool.
did that. So yeah.
Nice. Yeah, these things are always fun. It's good to help raise money for charity and go and show up and represent and get a little exercise while we're at it. And we're gonna attempt to do this 3-hour walk with the new puppy. So this is gonna be interesting. We'll see how tolerant she is to all this. Yeah, she's like 12 weeks old, so she's very energetic. But I don't know, a 3-hour walk. We'll see how it goes.
Yeah.
So
cool.
We have an interesting topic for everybody today, and this is might be just as much of a rant episode as anything else, and it's probably going to go in all sorts of different directions. But Martin and I have been talking over the last week about this whole concept of old music versus new music. Which is better? Which do we prefer? What do we listen to more? Why do we kind of always go back to the old classics versus the newer stuff? And newer stuff, we're not just talking about new bands, we're talking about new stuff from old bands as well. And there are a couple of new releases from older acts that have come out in very, very recent weeks, where you hear all sorts of things out there about how this is the best album they ever did, or this is the worst album they ever did, and we'll get into all that. So sit down, relax, and just kind of soak it all in. Like I said, this is going to go shooting off in all sorts of different directions, and I'll have Martin kind of kick us off with this whole conversation, kind of get to the gist of why we decided to do this topic.
Yeah, so I have a bunch of notes, and like you say, it kind of goes all over the place. And I kind of want to split it up a little by, is old music better than the new music, and then go on to like, okay, so what are my listening habits, and hear your listening habits, sort of thing. But so in preparation, I listened to a couple of YouTube videos about this, and a Rick Beato one as well. And I'm not ever buying the arguments that these people make about, he had one, for example, that old music had so many more chords in it. Here Comes the Sun, or he was doing some Earth, Wind and Fire example, and listen to all these different chords, and there's way less chords now. He also mentioned things like there was A&Ring back in the day, and there's no A&R anymore. Now it's all down to TikTok analytics and things like that, right? So there's all this kind of stuff going on as well. And he also makes the point, and he was riffing off of an article that came out saying that 70% of all stuff played on Spotify is old music. And then there was also a stat that he mentioned that the top 200 new songs right now only make up 5% of all Spotify plays, which I think is actually a lot for 200 songs. I mean, it's crazy, right? So there has been this argument made that the old classics are way better than new music. But I kind of argue a couple things here. I always sort of want to step away from that, because in all our genres that we listen to, in all our prog and heavy metal and post-punk, new wave, there's things that are named based on old things, but roots rock, country, whatever you want to say. There's probably stuff out there by new artists that is as good as the old stuff, and lots of it. There's way more art than we can possibly consume. That's kind of the point. There's so much breaking up into the subgenres and all that I think there's tons and tons and tons of new music out there that is as good or better and done with the same old methods, It doesn't have to necessarily use new technology in that. That is as good as the old stuff. In part two, I'll get to why that doesn't matter to me very much, and what I would rather sort of listen to. But and one more point to make before I turn it back over to you is we're talking about, is old music better than new music? If you define new music by poppy hip hop, right? If you say there's a certain kind of new music that dominates, I would say yes, because I personally don't like that music. I find it way less guitar, bass, and drums. It's written by all that stuff that we say. It's written by a boardroom. It's produced by another boardroom of 3 producers per song. Don't like the lyrics, don't like the singing, don't like the hip hop beats. Don't like the themes. So but we really can't define new music just by that. But it's interesting that there is a dominant form of music right now that has put guitar, bass, and drums, kicked it to the curb, kind of thing, right?
Oh, yeah.
Although of course there's obviously loads and loads of metal. So I'll leave it there for a second and turn it over to you. I've got more points to make, of course, but what do you say, kind of in response to kick off?
Artificial versus organic, right? I think you described it perfectly. A lot of popular music, okay, and not all music, is very artificial over the last 25, 30 years. But I harp on this all the time because I talk to people constantly who are in our age bracket who say there is no good music being made anymore. And I always ask them, well, where are you going to hear your new music, or what new music are you talking about? Oh, whatever they play on the radio, whatever is featured on, it's because now everything is all about media, right? So it's who are the media, social media stars, because that's what makes stars nowadays. It's like who talks the most on TikTok and Instagram and shows up at the awards ceremonies and TV, the red carpet, all this kind of stuff. That's who we deem as our pop stars. In the old days, it was rock stars. Now it's pop stars and pop culture stars. What's being force fed everybody is, flavor of the month stuff, artificial, mass produced, not a lot of guitars and drums. Who knows who writes the songs? Who even knows who plays on the songs, right? Whereas in the old days, you had bands going into the studios with an actual producer, writing their own songs, playing their own instruments, spending 6 months in the studio or longer, creating these albums that we have come to know and love over all the years. But as you said, there are a lot of new young bands who are creating new music, whatever the genre might be, rock, classic rock, metal, prog, country, alternative, whatever you want to call it, that don't get played through all these social media platforms, right? They don't get this exposure. And so unless you're either someone in our position who, gets sent shitloads of albums all the time from these new bands to go and check out, and our job is to help talk about them and promote them, you're never going to know about any of these bands. So you're assuming that the only popular music is the shit that's being force fed out there. And we think it's all crap, right? But that's not all that's out there. There are probably, you threw up this 5% number before. Probably what everybody deems, the masses deems as popular music that's being exposed, is a minuscule amount of all the music that's being made. That's why it's so cool to go on like Bandcamp and check out all these great bands that are self-releasing their own albums. There's tons of great music out there. And what's really interesting is a lot of people our age, they tend to, and we're going to get into this more as this hour goes by, but they tend to go back to and favor the bands and the albums that they grew up with when we were all sponges as younger kids. And maybe we bought 10 albums a year and we spent the whole year with those 10 albums and nothing else. So we got to know them inside and out. Maybe we still listen to them and love them. But as we got older and we had less and less time to spend with music, we shied away from new music and we just went back to the old classics, like that warm and fuzzy thing, that comfort blanket, right? And it's a different way of consuming music. And like one of the things that's difficult for me in what I do is like I don't have the kind of time in recent memory to, if a brand new, like a brand new album by a fairly new band, this is a prog metal band, Virtual Symmetry, comes out with this great album. It's amazing. I really, really enjoy it a lot. I'll probably listen to it a lot for the next couple of weeks. And then I've moved on to 10 other things because that's what I have to do. So it's not like 1984 all over again, where I had my, I bought, like I said, 10 albums in that year, and man, that's all I listened to for a year, two, three, whatever. And it's so those albums get ingrained in your psyche, and then it's just the way it was back then. Now everything music is, boom, 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 boom. There's so much of it. You kind of listen to it, you like it, you don't like it. I've moved on to the next thing already, and that's, I think, how a lot of people look at music. And so all this new stuff that's coming out, I don't think gets the time that it really needs, because there is so much, and it's so easy to get, like Spotify. I know a lot of people enjoy using that as a great tool, but when something new pops up on your Spotify, how much would you give it one listen? And if it doesn't instantly grab you, it's forgotten, never to be revisited again. Whereas, 30, 40 years ago, even, we bought an album by our favorite band or a brand new album by a band that was recommended to us. We'll listen to it once, maybe, oh, that's pretty good. And then the next day you play it again. And maybe the next week you play it again, until ultimately you're like, this is actually pretty good. It's grown. I've given it a chance to grow on me. I don't think many people give anything a chance to grow on them anymore. It's like instant gratification or not. And with that, I'll turn it back over to you.
Yeah, I'll try to stick discipline to this idea of quantity of music out there. So a funny thing I did yesterday as an experiment to try to go, okay, so what I tried to look up what are the biggest, best metal albums of 2022, or I'll stick with metal here too, and just try to frame this in, or 2021. And you look up all these lists and you go, okay, so what happens is, because the genres have been split so much into micro subgenres over the decades, right? Where there's just so many different kinds of things. You go look up some magazine's list, for example, and all of a sudden it's literally the personality of that one writer.
Sure.
It could be, I don't even have the confidence to go play some of these bands that I know nothing about, because it's almost like I don't even know where this band, forget about where they fit in top of 2022. I don't even know where they fit in their own subgenre, right? And it's like every single one on this list, even though they're all obscure bands, quite often it's like they're across so many different subgenres. It's almost like you're thinking that writer's picking a representation of each subgenre to put in there, right?
Right.
Just to show some sort of range. And then like, oh, do I put in anything famous or not? How do where does that go? Because they're all making records too, right? And I also, so we really, really need gatekeepers that and you're a great gatekeeper. Like when you play stuff, your audience, and you do a good long detailed review of something new, and that's really going to give people the idea. But try look up lists of greatest albums. It's almost impossible, right? You have to know what that magazine or website or their personality is to even get close to realizing whether you're going to like this or not. Now, the next thing that happens with these micro subgenre situations is that every single band, be they a brand new band or an old band. Actually, I've got examples to sort of show of this. This is my one prop. Well, before I get to the prop, I wanted to say something about the new Megadeth album. So the first thing that happens is yeah, there you go. So with the subgenre situation, when the subgenres are so much tighter in terms of what the rules are about, this has actually nothing to do with Megadeth, come to think of it, with what they do with the rules, right? Every one of these bands, old bands, new bands, but definitely new bands, they operate in such a tight range now, because that is their subgenre, that record to record to record, 2 years apart or whatever, same producer, made very much on computer. They sound so similar to each other. There's not, the biggest example of range I can think about in the world is probably Queen Night at the Opera, something like that, right? You certainly aren't going to get that sort of thing. Or Zeppelin doing a fairly acoustic album in 3 or whatever, or Queensryche even went up and down all over the place and gave you a lot of range, and a lot of people complained about that range, right? Metallica gave a lot of range, but a lot of that range, oddly enough, was in production. So production is something also that has tightened, that there's a perfect production sound, and the variants on either side of that sound are not as varied as they were across, say, look at all those Metallica albums, for example. They're almost like the blueprint for, you know, a generation or two on, but still being able to like give you different productions all the time and go, what do you think of this? You know, it's weird, it's different. You either like it or you don't, right? So example, you know, an example of this range thing is, you know, I also add, to get prepared for this episode, I went and played, what's Dimmu Borgir doing these days? What's their new album sound like, right? So I went and played it, right? And so here's the old stuff, right?
Yeah.
So they had a certain sound. It was really, really rough at the very beginning, and it smoothed out a little, and it became whatever. And then you get to the 2000s ones, you get to these records, and all of a sudden the range is really tightening up, right? And I played the new one, and I went, this sounds just like the last 5 or 6. They're safe. They're doing what they do. They have their sound. No more black metal production. You know, the production's just basically fine. You know, everybody's tossed that to the curb. Now getting to Megadeth. So here's something I've always said, and it doesn't really get much traction, but I totally believe this. You know, when we did an episode on making, you know, some bands making their best music now, sort of thing. Some bands can do that and make very different music to the old days, like Deep Purple, right? Some bands kind of just get to be a more modern version of their old sound and then just kind of do a better job, like a Motorhead. And I'm looking at, I look at that new Megadeth, right? And I have no problem saying this is the greatest album they've ever done. This literally is like, I listen to it and go, and here's the point, and this is the point I make, and a lot of people don't buy this point, right? Because it's a bit of a fantasy point. But if you took all the Megadeth songs and threw them into a big pot and wiped the dates off the back of the thing and wiped any knowledge of, you know, the legend that is Rust in Peace and Countdown and you know, how did that first album come together and why, and the anger and all that stuff. You wiped everything off of this stuff and threw them all into the pot. I guarantee you, Megadeth fans would be picking out as their favorite songs from Dystopia and the sick, the dying and the dead, or whatever it's called, right? Because they're so catchy, so perfect. They're accessible. They're not particularly thrashy. So on the one hand, I was driving around in the car yesterday listening to that, going, yep, greatest Megadeth song of all time. Yep, greatest Megadeth song of all time. There it is again. Absolutely perfect, amazing, right? Because you know, the band, I've always thought some of these bands, it's logical that you get better at what you do, right? Dave's voice is getting a little crustier, but his lyrics are getting funnier and more, you know, wise. And he's kind of a bit of a right winger and all this stuff too. So there's kind of that interesting thing about him, right? He's a conspiracy theory guy. And so there's a humor in what he's doing, and people complain about his vocals. But I go on Facebook and I see people say, it's okay. And other people say, oh, it's really good. It's like, well, you know what? It's not just okay. It's way beyond okay. But your bar now is so high because basically Megadeth has turned in like eight really, really, really good albums in a row. The last time they did albums anybody complained about really are you know, the whole Risk cryptic writings period, right? So, but yet everything you said, you can still complain about. The drums are almost distracting to, you know, annoying to the point of distracting. They're so fluttery, kind of like bass drum triggering, lined up with the you know, the rhythm, you know, all the time, all over the place, right? And it also has something I'm sure you know a bit, and you'll probably talk about, but that compression feel, that claustrophobic feel, where there's not a heck of a lot of bass at the bottom, there's not a lot, and there's not a lot of grooving. It's very mechanistic, right? So there's things to complain about, but I swear to God, I mean, forget about the first 3 Megadeth albums. There's nothing on those albums that lines up remotely as good as what Dave's doing lately. But, you know, certainly I think, you know, finding some of these things about old schoolness and grooviness of Nick Menza and things like that, you can definitely notice things from an artistic level that are amazing on Rust in Peace and Countdown compared to this. But I swear to God, if you wipe the dates off that, people be pulling out these new songs all the time. Same with Motorhead. You know, I think of all the songs I love the most off of the first 3 Motorhead albums. And then like you pick any 2 Motorhead albums from the late era, and I could pick I can make one complete album at least out of those songs. I go, every one of these songs is better than every one of those old songs. But it's the history, it's the story, it's all that. I'll leave it there and turn it back to you.
Yeah, I mean, the history has everything to do with it, right? Because
Yeah.
I even said in my review of this, and I agree with all the points you made. There are songs on here that just remind you of shit off of Rust in Peace and Countdown, and certainly Peace Sells in the first album, right? I mean, and arguably Dave is also kind of borrowing riffs and things from those albums, and I get it. But if I was someone who was 30 years old right now and not 56 going on 57, and I didn't grow up with those early albums, and I just discovered Megadeth 5 years ago, right? Maybe Dystopia was the first album I ever bought. This is fantastic, right? This is the greatest thing ever. Because I've heard Peace Sells, and I've heard, So Far So Good, So What. And yeah, those are really cool too. But man, this is great, right? But then you have the person, again, devil's advocate, who those albums are beloved. Those were the first albums you got into. Again, maybe you were a teenager at the time. Nothing is ever going to compare. And there's no even consideration that it'll compare. So, again, so I've seen people say this is the best Megadeth album ever. I would like to know what their history with Megadeth is. And I've heard people say this is an awful Megadeth album, just like all of their last 5, 6, 7, 8, 10. So basically everything post 1990. And what's their history with Megadeth? Because I think that usually is that gets to you to the bottom of the equation on where you started with a band. Yeah. It's the same thing with this, right? So the new Ozzy record. Yes, everybody watching, I did go out and buy the new Ozzy record. I've seen people say that this is his best album since Diary. I've seen people say that this is just as poor as everything he's been doing since No More Tears. I'm kind of in the middle on it. I think some of his best material is on here since No More Tears. I think half of the album is just as kind of boring and unmemorable as everything he's been doing since No More Tears. So, while hearing Ozzy getting back together with Tony is a great thing. Again, there's the nostalgia thing. The old is now new, and it's great. That's very, very cool. I want to hear more than that. It's just kind of difficult, because I have tons of history with this guy. But at the same token, he has proven to me time and time again in recent years that his output is not quite up to the classics, right? But yet I'm always open and willing to listen to what he's got to say. Similar thing with the new King's X. And this is a band, so this is a perfect example. So this is a band that's been around for a long, long time. And as everybody on this channel knows, Martin knows that I was resistant to this band up until like a year and a half ago. So I don't really have the history with them. My history was that, I just never really got into them, didn't really give them much of a chance. Now, all of a sudden, I am a big fan. So to me, this is pretty solid King's X. Is it as good as their early stuff, which I, now as a new convert, probably gravitate towards? No, but is it pretty solid compared to the most recent things they've done? And recent is stretching it because they have not done a lot recently. It's pretty good. But again, I've seen comments out there that this is the best King's X album in 30 years, to people saying this is a horrible King's X album. I don't know. What's their criteria? What's their history with the band? I don't know. The production is a little different. I give it that. I mean, production, if we're going to talk production, and that's one of the notes that we had going into this episode to talk a little bit about that, varying degrees of differences in the opinions of the production of this album. To it's cold and clinical and eerie, too much auto-tune, all this kind of stuff, to it's the best sounding Ozzy album in 30 years. I mean, obviously we're all hearing it differently, right? And it's just that so you have to kind of take that into account as well, because, and we haven't touched on that yet, modern day productions are way different than productions in the 60s and 70s and even part of the 80s. But that's just the way it is. I talk to people all the time who constantly complain, I don't like the modern day compression. I don't like the way albums sound anymore. Albums sounded so much greater in the 70s. And I think we all get that, but we're never going back to that. And I think to continue to not explore current albums because your heart is back in the 70s and nothing's ever going to compare, I think people are missing out a little bit. with that, I'll turn it back over to you.
Yeah. Okay, so just a couple more points before we get to the sort of, what do we prefer sort of thing. So I did a quick one of these 60-second reviews for Brave Words on this new Saxon song and video. I played it, great song, sounds great. But again, I'm listening to it and I go, this could have been off of Priest Firepower. It's identical to everything off of Firepower. So there's the other thing when the bands are this new perfect gleaming fit, been on the treadmill version of their old selves. What do you do with that, right? Yeah. Back to the Megadeth point, you made that point. It's great, a young kid coming into it, that young kid would go back and listen to Peace Sells and Killing Is My Business and go, these both sound like demos compared to what they sound like now, right? And the songwriting is like, what? He hasn't even written any good songs here, right? And Peace Sells a legendary album, right? And I always make it, this is a slightly different point, but this whole idea, history, who did it first? The who did it first thing is sort of part of the history and part of the legend. So, when people go crazy when I say, oh, Jason Bonham's twice the drummer John Bonham was, right? His dad was, and all this stuff, right? The legend is John Bonham and the things he did and the innovations and the cool stuff and those memorable things. But, was he groovier or even bluesier? Did he have a better pocket and all this stuff than Jason? No, I don't think so. I mean, Jason Bonham is a beast. He's amazing as a drummer, right? And the same thing, like when we have this discussion about, Neil Peart, the greatest of all time, right? Well, he is, because he's the guy who set the records, right? He set the records early on, and then people broke the records, and people did cooler, trickier thing, groovier things, technical things that Neil probably couldn't do, all that kind of stuff, right? So that goes into it as well. Who else? Oh yeah, I wanted to mention this as well. So I thought, because to me, new bands, anything past 2000 is like last Monday to me. I mean, it's basically 20 years ago. Oh, it's like, it seems like a year ago, right? So I thought I'm going to play a big band who's been big for quite a while that I don't really give the time of day. So I walked around yesterday listening to Disturbed for a bit, right? And Disturbed is so, it's like a sugar rush right to your veins of riff and rhythm and the David Dream and the articulation and his weird cool vocal style and stuff. So it's so the point is that there's always new music that can surprise you and do something new that didn't exist before. And they're a huge famous band, and kudos to them. It's like, and I'm listening to this, to make a point you made earlier. It's like, I'm listening to this and going, I love this. This is great. I'm totally enjoying this. But I remember going on a Disturbed kick for 2 days, like 2 years ago. And I remember back in the Brave Words day interviewing those guys and seeing them live and stuff. So it's like 15 years ago, 2 years ago, yesterday, and I'll probably not think about Disturbed again for a while because there's so much quantity out there, like you say, right? But it gives you faith, like new things do happen. People say everything under the sun's been invented when they're crusty, talking about, oh, the only old music was there's only so many chords and all this stuff. Well, like, people do surprise you with new things every once in a while, and Disturbed's kind of like that, right? Yeah. So it happens out there. But again, I think there's so much quantity, and the genres are so micro now that there's way too much safeness within that. And we've groused about the safeness even between old bands like Accept and Saxon and Priest, all sounding kind of similar, and chuck on a whole pile of brand new power metal bands who have 2 or 3 or 4 or 5 albums. Maybe they've even been around for 12 years or something, right? Yeah. They can give you exactly what Accept, Priest, and Saxon are giving you as well. So there's so much out there, right?
Yeah.
I'll turn it over back to you.
Yeah, I mean, I like your example of Disturbed, and I'll throw one that while you were saying that, I thought of a band that I've been listening to a lot lately that I've always been moderately into, but again, it's just, how many bands and how many catalogs can you constantly listen to? I've been listening to a lot of Clutch lately, and this is a band that you've been highly recommended to me to get more into, as many other people. And I had this misinterpretation of the music of Clutch, I think, for a long time, as just, yeah, they're another kind of bluesy stoner rock band. There's a million of them. I listened to a lot of them already. I liked a couple Clutch albums I've had, and I was like, yeah, whatever. I've seen them live, but I decided that this is a band I need to invest a little more time with. And you know what? Clutch is a really different, unique band that doesn't sound like anybody else. Yeah, they have little things that they've consumed that has helped them kind of hone their style and their sound. But man, you listen to these Clutch albums, they're all really different. They're all really unique. And they're like in this little space all their own. You really can't lump them in with anybody else. They're obviously very bluesy. They got little bits of boogie. They definitely have the sludge and stoner thing. They've got some doom. They've got some southern rock, all mixed into one. They got a very unique sounding singer. Their riffs are different, and the groove is always there. And you listen to them throughout their catalog, and you can see all these little journeys that they've gone on. And I'm really excited to hear the new one. And so there, to me, and we haven't really touched on this, is a lot of times we talk about new music, and to us, especially us who talk about music all the time and review music and rate music, we'll say, oh yeah, this band's fairly new. They debuted in 1992. Since when is 30 years like new? It's really not. But because there's such a long music history that we cover, the last 20, 30 years is kind of new. Most people who think new, they think the last 5 years. We tend to expand that. So for me, I've been saying, yeah, Clutch is one of these newer bands that I've really been getting into. And in fact, they're not new at all by any stretch of the imagination. But what is new? That's the thing. What is new now? I don't know. And what's old? Clutch, to many people, is old music.
Yeah. And Clutch again drives home that point. It's like JP is as bluesy as any, or as groovy and in the pocket and so soulful as any big drummer from the past that you want to bring up, whether it's Charlie Watts or John Bonham or whatever. And the band themselves can be as bluesy as your favorite blues from the 50s and 40s. That's right. So that's kind of the point that I think people who champion new music should and would make, and saying, look, just because it came out in 1950, it's blues from 1950 doesn't make it hallowed, right? You can actually be bluesier now, in 2022, and you can be bluesier and be a young kid. I it really rankles me when people complain about those virtuosos that are like 8-year-old little girl drummer from Japan, right? And they'll say, yeah, she's just, she's got no groove though. She doesn't understand the history of music. Well, she can be as good, and imagine how good she's going to be in 5 years, right?
Yeah.
So that's the whole thing about the new thing. And now moving on to moving on to so do I listen to a lot of new music? So here's the thing. Here's why I don't listen to a lot of new music, and I'll qualify that by saying I listen to plenty of new music, but usually it's a very specific category, and it's all the new music by all the old bands. And there's tons and tons and tons of that to listen to. Yeah. But my point is that I need so many lifetimes to include what I just said, plus the new music by the new bands, plus the thing that I'm even more excited about. It's like all the old music that I know nothing about, that I've forgotten about, or I barely knew. And I just brought out some ridiculous props to make that point. It's like I just grabbed a clutch of my vinyl, right? It's like Amazing Rhythm Aces, 2 albums, zero idea what they sound like. America, Holiday, right? It's like Contrarians just did a yacht rock episode, right? It's like, okay, so I would love to explore more of that yacht rock stuff, plus the stuff that came after UK glam, that is the polite version of glam, which is almost yacht rock, plus whatever this stuff is, it's almost yacht rock, right? American Flyer. So that's just a bunch of records in a row. British Lions. I forget what this sounds like. Who is Brick? I've got my Brewer and Shipley collection, right? It's like, and so the idea is, I got 2 friggin' copies of this one, right? Yeah, this is kind of neat. They called it ST11261, the catalog number, right? Billy Bremner. This is literally, these albums are right in a row. Breeding Ground. No idea what they sound like. Bread. Don't really remember what bread sounds like, but I've got them here. And the point is, I want to make there is that, you could spend a lifetime just going back and checking out all that stuff. Now, why would you want to? I mean, does that make you an old crusty person? Well, it's everything you said at the beginning. It's like, they were made in expensive studios. They used real strings. They used superstar producers. They all cost $100,000 to make at least, right? So you're getting a certain level of quality. There weren't indie labels, so they all were on major labels. So they all had to be good. They all had to probably pay their dues and rise. So there's some sort of implied level of quality if you're on a major label already with something, right? All the vocal harmonies were done, the old school way. The drums are all acoustic drums. Nothing has been really particularly faked other than punching in and, splicing solos together and things like that. But also the idea is that, so the other example is, I was just reading in an old record collector magazine about Average White Band, right? So again, I've owned a bunch of their albums over the years. Don't remember what they sound like. Maybe I'll like them, maybe I won't. But I look them up on Wiki, and it's like, wow, they had a gold, then a platinum, then a gold or something. It's like, this is a big band, right? So just the history of how big they were, the impact, who died. Death is kind of interesting and intriguing. Like listening to dead artists. People do talk about that. It's an uncomfortable thing to talk about, but it's like, well, that adds an extra layer of intrigue to it. It's like, wow, this guy's been dead for so many years. There's that story. There's when did they break up? When did they reform? So there's these long narratives, and those narratives cause a synergy to build that story even more. So that against a compressed narrative of even say an Amon Amarth, who's probably been around for probably 25 years or something now, maybe even more. Like, I don't know how many albums they have. Chances are they all sound pretty similar. I've seen them live a bunch of times. I've met them. I've interviewed them over the years, but I just feel like even their story, oddly enough, even their story maybe is not all that exciting compared to a story of even the same length that, at least to me, that happened in the 70s, right? Bands before there was an internet, before 9/11 happened, before even fax machines in some cases, right? Like these bands that grew up the same time I grew up, I guess, is part of it as well. And also the idea that these people are all, if they're still alive, they're all older than me. So it's like, I'm not listening to kids who I can't relate to. I'm listening to people who are older than me, who technically, I suppose, is the same thing. You can't relate to them either, but you did all kind of grow up in the 70s or the 80s, and you're growing along with that narrative. I don't know. I'll turn it over to you.
Yeah, I mean, that's a good point. There's something to be said about these artists who have a storied history that, to us as music lovers, is fascinating, right? So as you were talking, it kind of sparked up a bunch of things here. So I'll take a case in point, a guy like Adrian Belew, who has played with tons of great bands that, Talking Heads and Zappa and King Crimson, tons of solo stuff, lots of projects in recent years, right? I've never really collected much of his solo stuff, but I've always really liked him. So after, getting into his new one, I'm like, you know what? I had a couple of these on cassette back in the day. I haven't heard him in years. So I went out and, just to start my whole re-journey into Adrian Belew, I went and got, which are probably considered 4 of his greatest early solo albums. Yep. And just because, right? And the Amon Amarth thing is really, really interesting because, me personally, they're a good band. They're good at what they do. I've seen them live a ton of times. I have a few of their albums. All of it kind of sounds the same to me. And it's almost like some of these bands that have come up in more recent times, there's a machine-like way of kind of putting together records. Whereas we seem to think, and maybe it's true, maybe it's not, that stuff like this from this time period, from the 70s and the 80s, it's a little different. There's a lot of history here. There's a lot of complexity as far as who played on them, and from album to album, different musicians, different producers. Stylistically, they're each different from each other. I think that means a lot. I mean, another example of getting into, because I love your idea about one of the things of newer music to us is older music that we never listened to back in the old days. A perfect example is Tom Petty for me. Here's a guy that all over the radio for the entire existence that he was on this earth. And I always liked the hits, the radio hits, never saw him live, never ever considered even wanting to buy one of his albums. He's just one of those guys that it's, his music is not always my cup of tea. Uh, but I never disliked him. And I've owned like a double disc greatest hits compilation forever. And I always thought that's all I would ever need from Tom Petty. Well, a few months back, I got the bug that I was like, yeah, you know what? I kind of want to dive into this guy a little bit more because maybe there's more to him than just what I know from hearing on the radio. So, lo and behold, over the last bunch of months, I've been going out and, I got the whole Tom Petty catalog, and I got to say, I'm really enjoying it. So here's an old guy discovering old music that's new to me. And yeah, I know all the hits, know them backwards and front because obviously that's he was all over the place.
And he's dead. The catalog's over, right? It's
right.
Got a start, it's got an end, it's got a story. It's literally a closed book, right?
Absolutely. So yeah, and to kind of sum up my habits, I'm in what seems like a no-win situation that I'm constantly trying to play catch up because I have a lot of history with a lot of bands that I love a lot, and I still like to listen to a lot of that. And like my time, like at the gym, it's like a comfort thing. When I'm working out, I like to hear stuff that's very, very familiar to me, like comfort food, right? So I'll be at the gym, I'll be playing the classic Rush and Sabbath and all those bands that I love so much because it helps, because I know it so well, and it helps drive my workout. I tend to not listen to a lot of newer things while I'm working out. Driving in the car, I like to listen to newer stuff, either newer releases from bands I know or new bands. But so it's trying to find time to listen to the old stuff that I know really well. And when is that time? I often have to listen to new releases from new and old bands because that's what I do. That's what I do here. But like I mentioned earlier at the top of the show, after a couple of weeks with something new, I got to move on to 10 or 20 other things. So it's like the new stuff tends to get shelved away pretty quickly. And I may not revisit them for a while because there's so much coming. But I have found a real soft spot for those older bands that are putting out new music because I feel a loyalty to those bands. I probably give the newer stuff more of a chance than some people might. And I take a lot of it's rewarding for me when a band that I really love and I've loved for a long time, and late in their career they put out something that's really, really good, because I really want to love new music from older bands. That's why for me, I'll go back to the Ozzy thing again. That's why for me it has been disappointing for like close to 30 years that every Ozzy album that comes out I want to love so much, and after and after it comes out I'm like, God, this isn't really any good, right? And so with this new one, there's a handful of songs on here I think are pretty damn good. The rest of it don't do with anything for me, and I'm disappointed in that. And people are like, but Pete, it's Ozzy. It's like, I get it. I want to feel that excitement. I want to really love this. But if I'm being honest with myself, half of this just isn't any good. The other half is really good. Let's celebrate that. So that's why we can say that, what, part of this album is really, really good. So for the first time in a few years, we've got a halfway decent, fun Ozzy album. I don't know. So it's like, to me, it's like a never ending thing that just, and you have to kind of balance, when I'm going to go and celebrate the old classic stuff that I love and sit and spend time with that. I've spent many, 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 many hours with that stuff all throughout my life. But how much time do you dedicate to the newer stuff? And how much can you dedicate to the newer stuff? That's the challenge for me anyway.
Yeah, my summing up would be I totally agree with you. I think there's a healthiness in having as part of your I listen to new music thing being the hundreds of bands we know from however long ago who are still making new music. So that is all technically new music. But there's also, a healthiness to saying, you've got a curiosity for all sorts of, genres and movements from the 60s, 70s, 80s, and 90s that you didn't pay attention to, massive catalogs by bands you paid no attention to go back and learn that stuff for the first time too. And then I think there's also, even though I am going to more or less admit that I definitely don't listen to a lot of new music by new bands. And for the reasons I've mentioned, but also just for the reasons that there is so much quantity of all that other stuff. And I'm not ashamed to say that still shows some sort of curiosity for new music, whether it's new ancient music or new music by old bands. But again, I'm never going to say, I also just on the idea that, a 22-year-old kid could make a better blues album than a Buddy Guy album right now. I'm never gonna be that guy that says, no way anybody can make a better blues album than Albert King, right? I'm never going to be that guy either, or say nobody can make a better album than a Led Zeppelin album or whatever, because I personally, again, on that weird thing, I could almost say that I like most of the Black Country Communion albums better than most of the Led Zeppelin albums. I think they're all genius, right? So there's that kind of healthiness too. So that's where I am. So the one thing I am sort of ashamed about admitting, out of all that, is that no, I won't go listen to a bunch of new kids doing Judas Priest music. Don't need it. I can listen to Judas Priest doing modern Judas Priest music. I can listen to Judas Priest making old Judas Priest music. I definitely don't need a bunch of young kids making Judas Priest music. I don't need to go hear that.
I think one of the last points I want to make is that 30, 40 years ago, when any of our favorite bands would come out with a new record, we generally go get it right off the bat without hearing it. Today is a little bit different. People were like, "Oh, I will never buy anything blind." It's like I have to go and listen to it a few times, or at least once before I buy something. So there's not with a lot of people, there's not that loyalty anymore. It's like, if I'm going to spend my money on it, I got to hear it first. Whereas, back in the old days, you just bought it. Kiss comes out with a new record, you buy it. Priest comes out with a new record, you just buy it. What I wish there was more of, and I think, for me, there are a number of bands who have come out. Let's use 20 years as an example. So the last 20 years, we'll say, is new, recent. There are bands like, Mastodon and Opeth, Arch Enemy, I don't know, just to name a couple of bands, Lamb of God, whatever. There are certain bands who have come out in the last 20 or so years where I'm proud to say The Sword, I'm proud to say when they come out with a new album, it's an auto buy for me. And with all the new bands that have come out in the last 20 years, how many of them do we really have? Evergrey is another one, right? Primal Fear is another one, right? There is a decent amount of bands that are fairly new, that when they come out with something new, Rival Sons, I'm buying it right off the bat. But there are others that I'm like, okay, yeah, I don't know if I need to have that. I'll go check it out, because I'm just as guilty as that sometimes too, because you can't buy everything. And now there's so much. There's just so much. But it's good. It's good to have nowadays, for me, a set of bands that are fairly newish, that are already on my kind of auto buy. And I know I'm looking forward to it, and I'm just going to jump right on it when it comes out. Just like I did 30 and 40 years ago with the Black Sabbaths and the Deep Purples and the Maiden and Scorpions and the Rainbow and Priest and all that kind of stuff. So,
yeah. All right. I'll leave there.
Yeah, I think we're
done.
So everybody watching who is attending Sea of Tranquility Fall Fest in just about a week, actually it'll be a week tomorrow, Martin and I will have a session in the middle of the afternoon, basically kind of like what we do here each and every Friday. We've got about an hour, and we are going to have a loose topic that we're going to kind of kickstart our session off with. But for all of you who are coming to the event, these sessions that we're doing in the Prague seat, Hudson Valley Squares, the session with Martin and myself, the session with Chris Caffrey, the session with Andy Powell from Wishbone Ash. There will be loose topics for all of them, but it's meant to be interactive. So we will jumpstart the conversation with the topic that Martin and I are going to talk about. Martin, we probably should just save it for then. I don't think we should give any kind of a teaser. But come with your questions. All right. We're hoping that the topic will prompt you to ask questions revolving around the topic, but I'm sure there's going to be people there who want to know all sorts of things about you and I and whatnot. So I'm sure that'll come as well. But yeah, so we'll kickstart our session off with a cool little topic, and hopefully that'll spur some questions from you, the audience, and we're looking forward to it. So it'll be a lot of fun. So, Martin, what's going on? New Contrarians, new podcasts, books. Did you sell out the Bowie books? Are they all gone?
Yeah, that was great. Thanks for that review. Yeah, it definitely moved a few copies. That was excellent. And let's see, Contrarians. Yeah, we had one go up that was about Kurt Cobain. We had the Deep Purple Hoodoo, We Think We Are go up. My last episode of History in 5 Songs, so the audio podcast, was Consensus Best Songs. And I think the next one is my next one, which comes out Tuesday, will be on short-lived genres. So looking at genres that were short-lived, burned themselves out, never came back, that kind of thing. And that's it. Yeah, and the Alice Cooper books, The Damned, I'm packing up, sending out a lot of those. Those just came in last Friday, so martinpopoff.com for that stuff.
Cool. I definitely want to check out the episode on Yacht Rock, because I've been plotting one of those for a long time, but I don't want to be too influenced by the albums that you guys talked about, because I've already been putting my list together. Because there's a lot of stuff that's labeled Yacht Rock that I've always liked. And it's
I didn't go on it. I was too scared to go on because I don't know it enough, right? You could have held your own. And you know what? I watched the whole thing and realized, actually I learned a lot, but I realized generally the definition was what I thought it was, and the main players were who I thought they were. So
okay. Yeah, there's a lot that kind of plays into that sort of genre of music, but it's I'm afraid that I'm going to pick stuff that's maybe not quite, but there is no textbook on it, right? So it's like it's whatever. I don't know. I'll wait till the episode comes out.
They did make an interesting point that there's somebody said that there is an end point to it. Like soon as production changed and you got too much synthesizers, like 84, 85, I think they said that you can't be yacht rock after 1985 or something.
Right, because at some point it becomes melodic rock, and that's a completely different thing.
I guess. Yeah. I mean, I guess it's got to be about old production values and strings and vocal harmonies and all that sort of thing, which is kind of a late 70s trope more than anything, right?
Yeah. And I don't know if it definitely has to come from LA, right? Because I know a lot of it is a West Coast type of thing, but
yeah, it helps. It helps if there's boats involved. They made some funny points about lyrics about sailing and being out on the water and stuff, which was actually I found that quite funny.
Boats on the water, a nice breeze, sunshine, a cool drink. That's right.
Yeah. But that's why I'm kind of interested. I almost want to ask those guys, or do a more sophisticated episode even further and go into that polite glam thing that who are they, Pilot and Racy and these bands from about 75 to 74, 75, 76, City Boy, just after glam, right. Which I don't know if it even has a name. I call it polite glam. But it's a UK thing, and it's definitely not yacht rock. Yacht rock people would joke that these people hadn't even seen a boat in their lives, right?
Probably
sort of thing, right? So I don't know. Maybe there's an episode there on that whole movement. I wonder what that movement's called. Glam pop. I don't know, but to me, it's the UK version of yacht rock almost, right?
Yeah. All these little subgenres, you get dizzy just thinking about it. It's crazy. Yeah. So there you have it, everybody. Thanks for watching. Visit us on the web at www.seatranquility.org. We're on Facebook. We're on YouTube. All together, all the damn time. Please check out martinpopoff.com for all Martin's latest books. They're all up on the site, ready for you to purchase and consume. Martin's great about shipping stuff to you quick, man. It's like you order a book from Martin, man, even from Canada, coming here in the States. They arrive within a couple days or a week at the most, which is really cool. And we look forward to seeing all of you a week from tomorrow, Saturday at the Chance in Poughkeepsie, New York. But fear not, we will be back here next Friday as well. So stay tuned for a double shot of Martin and Pete next week. And till then, for Martin Popoff, I'm Pete Pardo. We'll see you soon. Have a good weekend, everybody.